this afternoon, we have the chance to welcome Orkan. Orkan is with us. Hi, Orkan, I can see you. That's perfect. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you, and a special thanks, of course, to Orkan. Thank you very much. It's a great honor and pleasure to welcome you. Orkan Telhan is from Turkey and US. He's an interdisciplinary artist, so it makes a lot of sense with our seminar dedicated to transdisciplinary. Interdisciplinary artist, designer, and researcher who investigates critical issues of social, cultural, and environmental responsibility. Telhan is Associate Professor of Fine Art, Emerging Design Practices at University of Pennsylvania, Wisman School of Design. He holds a PhD in Design and Computations from MIT's Departments of Architecture. Telhan's individuals and collaborative works has been exhibited internationally in venues including the Istanbul Biennale, Milano Design Week, Architectural Associations, Matadero Madrid, the Architectural League of New York, MIT Museum, Museum of Contemporary Art of Detroit, the New Museum of Contemporary Art in New York, Philadelphia Museum of Art, London Design Museum, and so on and so forth. Orkan Telhan is also a co-founder of BioRealize, a biotech company specialized in developing technologies to make biodesign accessible to designers. We know that it's Imagination Week, and Orkan, I know that you know that Imagination Week is a mix of discipline, transdisciplines, and we are very happy to welcome you. For us, of course, it's a very privilege, it's an immense privilege to welcome you. Art is a very important component of Imagination Week. We have an artist, actually. We have an illustrator with us today. The floor is yours, Orkan, to present your work, to present what you do. And again, thank you very much to be with us.
Thank you very much. It's a really pleasure to be here. And I'm honored to be part of the Imagination Week. I'll share with you some aspects of my work using some slides, but this amazing Zoom window, I can see all your faces right away. So thanks for sparing the time with me today. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. All right. You can see my screen well? Everything good? Right.
Yes, it's perfect.
Thank you. So with the kind introduction, I'm happy to tell a little bit more about my background. I am an educator at University of Pennsylvania. I practice as an artist, designer, and researcher. I'm a co-founder of a startup, and I also, consult different clients in the world that work in different aspects of design. But throughout the talk, I will present myself as a designer who engages with critical issues and try to imagine new design fields along the way while encountering with difficult problems in the world. So this is my contact information. If you have any questions, after the talk, please reach out. Do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to work with and collaborate with many of you after my talks when you have questions about my work. So what I did is I put together a group of slides that span my work for the last 20 years. But I worked on many different projects, from art projects to media installations to growing organisms to make new kinds of materials. So I picked very different projects from each other so that you get a sense of how I started and how I evolved over time, so that you can really see how I had to imagine my own career as I was moving towards the different disciplines that are available for me. So this is a slide deck that is colorful and ambiguous and weird, but hopefully it will make a lot of sense as I speak. These days I work with these kind of organisms. So I don't work with traditional things like paper, concrete, metals, different materials that designers are accustomed with. I work with living organisms. I work with bacteria, algae, or work with different organisms at different scales and make new kinds of products. So I picked this other rather unusual slide as a follow-up from the other slide, because I want you to understand that all of this practice is not really about what tools we use or what mediums that we engage with, but rather how do we pick the right tool to address the right big problem in our world. So let me start with giving you a little background of how I started and what kind of methodologies that I use in my work to really shape my thinking. And one of the key questions that I think is important for this crowd and for maybe your career in general is, how do we think about our imagination? But not only necessarily how creative we can get with our imagination, but rather how can we really realize that our imagination is by default shaped by other people. Those could be other books that we read, other philosophers that influence our life, other designers that we see, other educators that we inspire to, but our imagination is never shaped in our own hands. It's always constructed for us. So we really need good conceptual tools to unpack some of this. And this will be an important topic throughout my talk, because I think it's very important to understand what kind of methodologies that we can build to be able to undo the constraints that are built for us. So I usually start with asking questions. Whose ideas do we follow? Whose imaginations are we trapped in? And how do we really deal with them? So early in my career, in 2002, again, to abstract graphics, I wrote a master's thesis on the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze and Henri Bergson. You would be very surprised why the designer started to think about Gilles Deleuze and continental French philosophy, because I was doing a master's in theories of representation, and I was really asked to interrogate a lot of concepts. What is an image? What is a representation? What is a body? How do we think about epistemology? And all kinds of complex theoretical questions. And of course, I was a designer trying to make a living, working with the tools at hand. I was making album covers. I was making graphic design for all kinds of different clients. This is one example that I'm showing you, which is Peter Murphy, the lead singer of Bauhaus music band, who happened to run into my work and asked me to design an album cover in 2002. So on one hand, I'm studying French philosophy and trying to understand what Gilles Deleuze was thinking about the paintings of Bacon and theorizing them. In the meantime, I was trying to understand that philosophy and trying to apply that thinking into my work. So if you're familiar with Bacon's paintings, this is an homage to my understanding of how representation should be in 20th century. So of course, I moved on quickly, but my desire was to really see how much impact I can make with my field. So not only to mobilize some of the philosophers' thinking, but also bring those ideas into material form where it can disseminate. So I picked the CD-ROM, which is an ancient archaic technology that doesn't even exist today, but it's still very important for me because the images are now embedded in a format that could be distributed around the world. This CD-ROM was produced in thousands of copies, and you can still find them in online shops for lots of money. So you don't have to download these CDs to be able to listen to the music anymore, but the physical artifacts are important and still available for us. So the transition from the conceptual tools that I was using, well, to understand how I can imagine images differently, representation differently, I moved into more technical interrogations. So after graphic design, I started to look into product design and architecture. There was a 10-year gap between how I switched from graphic design to product design and architecture, but the tools were becoming much more interesting for me to investigate. You're looking at renderings of a bus stop. I'll show you a picture, which was also surprisingly and interestingly created in 2006 for RATP in Paris, the French Public Transportation Authority. But the key thing here is that as I was working with different clients, I was realizing that it's not only people who shape our imagination, but also the tools. Sometimes it's our image making tools, sometimes our 3D rendering tools, sometimes 3D fabrication tools. So whichever field you're investigating in your life, you should pay attention with who are making the tools and can you actually get out of their frameworks. So tools not only happen on the screen, I also learned how to fabricate things, which is a very important thing to think about embodiment and how do you bring your ideas into public space. I learned about electronics, I learned about computers. These are, so I'm not a very old designer, I'm in my mid 40s, and I learned a lot about technology only in the last 15 years. So I'm not like a born genius, trying to figured out everything early on. I learned a lot of technologies very late, very difficult. You know, learning programming took me like 5 solid years. I was miserable, it was terrible. But eventually I realized that if you pay enough attention, if you really get curious enough, you really learn how to build very interesting artifacts using the tools that are available at that time. But while I was, this is the final image of how that bus stop looks like. I'm not going to talk that much in detail about the works themselves, but rather the methodologies and the processes that those work allow me to explore. This was a project that I did collaboratively with a number of people at MIT Design Lab, and we did this for the 100th anniversary of bus transportation in Paris. So it was an experimental design that showed how we can use digital fabrication to make very low cost bus shelters or bus stops with custom displays and so on. This is the time where I learned how to work with LEDs and making pixels, not the pixels on the screen, but making the pixels on 3-dimensional space by building them custom from electronics. That's also the time, jumping ahead, where I learned about biology. So starting from album covers to bus stops to now living organisms, again, another couple of years in between, but there's a lot of similarities. And when you start thinking about these methods, what you're looking at is a tiny little droplet, a liquid we call a liposome, where you can put DNA and program it so that it can make protein, so that and in this case it can turn into green and make a little pixel. So from the pixels on the screen, the pixels on the bus stop, I built the pixel that was a living matter. So it can turn on, shine its lights in green when you activate it. Why is it important? Because it has nothing to do with making bus stop or images, but it was the same kind of curiosity, the same kind of questioning that moved from the virtual pixels on a screen to physical embodiments to soft matter, the materiality of the body, the desire to really work with living organisms so that we can actually explore different kind of designs and different kind of languages. So this is a field that I used to explore in my dissertation. I did my PhD in the Department of Architecture at MIT, but my focus was in synthetic biology. So for some of you who have a background in design or some curiosity in architecture and urban design, you may find these slides familiar, especially the one on the right. There's an entire history of building enclosures, building architectures for the human body. We have lots of different experimental architects in the world that imagine lots of different types of buildings outside the human body. And my critical question was, why in the history of architecture, architects never actually try to design something that will be inside the human body? Is all architecture always outside the body? Why never people designed the interior of their body? If you study Spinoza and Bergson in French philosophy, these kind of questions are normal. But when I was studying synthetic biology, lots of people were really surprised why you're really interrogating the idea of the body and why do you want to design inside the body and so on. So I'm not going to tell all the complicated things about the dissertation, but that was a pivotal moment for me where I can really connect the world of the digital fabrication, physical design to the wet world and biology. And that opened up a lot of possibilities for me that we will see in the next slides. So while I was figuring out what's happening with the world was also changing, right? The climate change, the global warming crises, there's a lot of different things that happen in the background. And we don't necessarily stay in our own fields to figure out what our disciplines teach us to be able to respond to them. So I started to look into creating my own field or supporting other people who are trying to create different fields. Instead of getting into the sciences and becoming a biologist, I tried to join the people who try to bring biology into design. We call it biological design. It's a growing movement in the world where lots of non-experts, non-scientists who don't have the time and energy and resources to study science, especially in the US when it's very expensive to go to get proper education, get into the fields, work with microorganisms, and actually design interesting products. So I will call that an exploration to growing fields and growing emerging disciplines so that we can actually respond to really, really big problems. That time, I was fortunate enough to bring big companies' curiosity also to biological design. I will show you about a project that I did with Puma in 2018, sorry. Which is called Carbon Eaters. And I'll show you a little video that explains the project a little bit, but I want you to pay attention to the same little pixel that I was building back in the album covers, to the LEDs on the bus stop, now with the living organisms that is functioning like a biosensor that detects air pollution. So let me play the video a little bit. So basically you're looking at little patches that you can attach onto your t-shirt before you go for a run. And there's an algae inside the little pouches that detect the carbon levels in the air and change color based on the intensity of the carbon. So it is a variable. It is a very simple technology, but it is a hard design problem to keep these organisms alive inside these little silicone pouches so that they can become reusable sensors. For me, the most important thing was to really convince the company Puma to do something like this so that it becomes scalable and have some impact in the world. We explored a number of different things with Puma, so I'm going to talk a little bit about other things so that you can understand that as you explore different trends of design, not everyone is in the same field with you. So Puma, the leading sneaker and apparel company, is interested in exploring new kinds of products, but they may not know how to approach them. So you can be one step ahead towards really experimenting with things. In this case, you're looking at a biodegradable packaging. Everyone is interested in biodegradable packaging, but what does it mean to design an active package where you can program the shelf life so that the package can actually inflate and become usable when you really need to use it? When you put your sneakers in, it inflates by itself, so it takes the shape of the object inside, and then it deflates when you really are done with the package. So in about a week, month, the package is eaten back with some bacteria so that it doesn't become a pollution, because it doesn't become a problem in the world. So why is this important? Because there's a lot of experimentation here, there's a lot of questioning here. Ultimately, it's not a product that is ready out there, but it's an interrogation. It's an ongoing interrogation by looking at the world, which is using extractive resources, it is polluting resources, and trying to address these problems with the world of living organisms. We exhibited our work. We couldn't really commercialize the products right away, but we exhibited our work in the Milano Design Week so that we can get some feedback from the people who actually might be interested in commercializing this or making things scalable. Because if you're a designer, you would notice from the business world, your impact is only as much as you can inspire other people, or you make a product that can be actually commercialized at scale. And I have a couple of other thoughts about this in the upcoming slides. But for us, bringing the work into public in an experimental setting, in an exhibition setting, was key in taking it to the next steps. So this is our little pavilion. This is a collaboration between Puma and MIT Design Lab. Small little experimentation, but then the work got picked up. It is now in a show in the London Design Museum, which is still, I think it's closing at the end of October, and then it's going to travel around the world. It's about sneakers. The show is about sneakers, and then we show a couple of our experimental sneaker design, which are also using biodegradable materials. But the message here is that the ideas embodied in this form are in circulation. So it's not just a little project that we did back in a research lab. It is now meeting a design audience. Scalability, as I mentioned, is very, very important, and it's at the very core of my practice from the early days of imagining my CDs to be circulated all around the world so that other people can see my design. Now, of course, we have the whole web, social media, anything that you put online can actually be very easily available for other people. But the question of how can we scale our impact? How can we inspire more? How can we really actually make things more accessible is still a very key question. And we are living in a world where designers are no longer interested in making things cheaper, or no longer interested in making things more and more for the sake of making it cheaper, because we know that it has dire consequences to climate or the globe, or the world around us. We are living in a finite planet which is extracted for all of its resources, and we need to be very, very responsible and careful with how you scale up things. So how do we do that? How do we find a responsible way of doing this? I will show you a couple of things now for the kind of work that I do in my company, BioRealize, which is a biotech company that is where I am the co-founder, but until a couple of weeks ago, I was the chief technology officer. Now we have a new management team coming and taking over, but I designed the hardware and the equipment for the company to be able to make bioreactors. What you're looking at is like the equivalent of a 3D printer you can take at home. You can put organisms inside and grow things so that you can make these biodegradable sneakers or biosensors. I'll show you a couple of pictures, but from the graphic design to product design to hardware engineering, I didn't really care too much about what I really need to know or what I really need to learn. I collaborated, I worked with other engineers and really came up with tools that are accessible to non-scientists. Very important, because you can find all kinds of tools for experts. They're very expensive. If you're a very well-resourced lab in the world, where you have access to resources, this is fine. You may, or you may even have the money and the resources, but you may not have the right education, because disciplines build walls around language. They build walls around terminologies, know-how. So you may never really understand how to grow an organism, how to transform its DNA, how to really turn them into applications. So I built a second product from our company, which is a portable incubator. This time it allows you to grow organisms at home. I'll show you what can you do with this, but it's a software, hardware. So those of you interested in bringing technological innovation into markets, this is an important moment for me to tell you that it's not easy to come up with hardware that is going to be scalable and easy to build and cheap for masses in the world. But it has been an ongoing struggle for me to really make sure that we can really bring the kind of innovation and experimentation that we can do in a research lab into design studios, so design offices. So similar to your 3D printer, or in this case, in this case, I don't have that image. In this case, a sewing machine, you should be able to bring your design tools next to each other and experiment with a lot of different things. So I'll show you a couple of things that you can do with this design, this tool. So imagine you are working with fermentation. Imagine you know how to really make kombucha, kimchi, all kinds of fermented foods. By using the same technology, by using the same know-how, we can show you how to grow biodegradable plastics, making biodegradable pigments, which you can use for painting things, or dyeing your fabrics, and so on. You can make electronic circuits where biological organisms can function as sensors, which can detect different pollutants or different kind of things in the environment. So from the food to the world of electronics, there's a whole range of applications that you can try in terms of new kinds of products. So we call it designing with biology, anyone, anywhere, because this is really an important thing to think about impact, to think about the ability to do things at home so that you can scale things up. It's also very important to think from the perspective of creativity. I'll show you one product because I don't want to talk too much about the food space. It's very also important to use the tools to ask the right questions. So what you're looking at is basically a cardboard chair, a cardboard paper, and I choose to show you the really raw sketch because I want you to understand that not every experiment, not every tool will immediately yield you the best design. But if I ask you, how can you make a concrete chair? Or coat the surface of a material with concrete so that it becomes robust, lightweight, robust, but also very long term. We don't have a solution for that. We don't really know how to pour concrete in this kind of form factor, in this kind of complexity, unless we really work with living organisms. And if you have a setup like the way I was showing you, if you can grow organisms at home, you can also grow concrete. So nobody really knows what does it mean to grow concrete, but there's a biological phenomena called biomineralization, where you can apply organisms to any surface. You're looking at chips, petri chips, where you can, we did some experiments with how do you grow the organisms in different thicknesses and different colors and so on. You can make them mineralize on any surface so that you can make a very advanced, paper-based concrete products. What does it mean to make paper-based concrete products? That genre of product design doesn't exist. That material is not in use. But there are now a number of designers and researchers working with us to make these kind of prototypes so that we can think about scaling things up. So this is a world of invention. This is a world of looking at things that don't exist before or exist in different capacities, so that now we can bring them into a different embodiment so that you can explore these things on your own. You don't have to work with a chair. You can explore this on any kind of material. You can be a jewelry designer, you can be a graphic designer, you can be a fashion designer. Now you can explore how to grow concrete at home at different scales. Similar to concrete, you can also grow different kinds of bioplastics using the same kind of materials, same kind of organisms. The experimentation space is open as long as you have access to the tools and know-how. So this was the slide that I was looking for when I was talking about yarn and pigments so that you can grow these things at home. This is a very important message for me when I was saying that your incubator should be next to your sewing machine, because we are very familiar with certain crafts, certain experiences. Biology, biotechnology is not about just high-tech tools and high-tech experimentation. It is a conceptual tool, it's a philosophical tool, it is a utilitarian tool that allows us to ask really interesting questions. What does it mean for us to stop synthetic dyes that are polluting the environment and switch to biodegradable ones, organic ones that are grown from organisms? You may read this on a magazine, or you may really subscribe to a TED Talk to understand how other people are doing this. But as long as you don't do this at home, you will never understand what it takes to do it. So my goal is to really bring things back to your home, back to your studio space, so that you can practice this. And I know I sound a little bit like preachy when I talk about these technologies. I apologize for this, but it is very important to understand the thinking behind this, because I'm not here to really sell incubators to really people who don't need them. It's very important that this is part of my practice of tool making, so that I can unleash my own imagination that's constructed by other people. A couple of pictures from what kind of colors you can achieve from these pigments. You can wrap these pigments inside 3D scaffolds so that you can put inside these syringes, put inside the machine grows the organisms, and then you have your colors. You can make your own custom color and use it for different scales. So we did this with a couple of fashion designers. Some of them embroidered different products and then start selling them on Etsy. And we really looked at the small scale economies that people can create without relying on big industries to switch to sustainable methods. So if this is a sustainable way of making yarn, how can you really do this in a small scale, in a medium scale that doesn't really depend on other people's infrastructure? So this is how it gets embroidered on denim. Secondhand denim, recycled denim, secondhand pigments. We are growing organisms to make the colors. You may get bright colors or you may not get bright colors, depending on how your cultural conditions are set. But these are very, very realistic designs. You can grow them in 3 days, 2 days, and immediately apply them into your products. So the next set of projects that I'm going to talk about is going to be very different. You know, I'm going to still be talking about biology, but now I'm going to shift towards what my relationship is to accountability and responsibility. As you might have heard from Javier, that I am very interested in questioning the idea of responsibility. What does it mean in my work to ask critical questions about designers' responsibility to future generations? And the future generations doesn't need to be humans. I'm not necessarily only interested in really saving the human race. I'm interested in questioning the human exceptionalism on this planet. What does it mean to work in harmony with other living organisms, whether they're plants or microorganisms? Our accountability towards all the resources and all the living matter on the planet, and how do we need to tackle with big issues? It may not be necessarily for you a big issue to think about growing pigments at home, because it's a tiny little liquid, tiny little vial. It may not look like it has a big impact in the world, but I am very much interested in really broadening up our understanding of big issues, big challenges, so that we can really tackle the big problems. So, as mentioned before, I am also an artist, designer working in the art world, let's put it that way, that leave behind sometimes the very pragmatic, practical aspects of making products, but then I enter into the world of provocation and speculation sometimes so that I can really push the imagination a bit further. So let me show you a couple of things about how I am really in war with the meat industry. You know, it will look like a bit like schooling, but you may love eating meat. I have nothing against that, but having lots of animals in the world for feeding 7 billion people, there's protein consumption. It has a lot of consequence into this world in terms of global warming. You may take that edge, or you might be an animal lover who is against animal cruelty. You can pick your side in terms of your relationship to animals. I don't eat meat, but I grew up in Germany and Turkey where I consumed a lot of meat in my entire life. So I don't want to be hypocritical about meat, because meat is also part of culture. Meat is not something that we can deny. But industrial meat production is a problem. It's a huge problem, and that's what I'm at war with. So what do people do to deal with meat? You might have heard this whole industry called cellular agriculture, which is all about growing meat, not from animals, but taking their cells so you can grow them in different scales, so that you don't have to kill animals, but you can grow things in large scale so that you can feed large populations. So this is a promising technology. There's a lot of startups in the world, but lots of people don't have view that when they are working with cellular agriculture, the ingredients, the raw ingredients that are used to feed cells are not necessarily sustainable. There are actually cells that are actually medium. There's actually ingredients that are used for feeding the cells that are coming from unborn cows. I'm going to show you this picture only for a second because it is a bit cruel. I'm just going to cover this. So unborn cows, blood is extracted from them and turned into this media to be able to really grow these burgers that you can consume in the future. So this is a problem because if there's not enough transparency in the world, and there's a lot of designers and artists who are aware of it. I'm not the only person that works in that space, but what kind of work that you can do to bring this into public imagination or public attention? So FBS, the serum that is used for feeding these cells, is a very expensive product. So if you grow your burgers out of this, it's going to be 10 times more, maybe 100 times more expensive than actually killing cows or pigs and other animals. But not many people talk about this. But as a designer, after doing some research with really important scientists in the field, I realized that this is the price from $973. I realized that human blood is actually much cheaper than sourcing FBS from unborn cows. So you can see the price comparison here. And for those of you who couldn't really make the connection yet, we are growing animal cells, mammalian cells. So you need to feed them with certain types of blood that is coming from the animal, the serum, not the red part of the blood, but the serum part of the blood. And human blood, as we are mammalians, is also a substitute. We can also grow mammalian cells with our own blood, especially if you use our own cells. And it will be much more sustainable and much more actually fair and much more consensual, as I will explain in a second. So the project that we did together with Grace Knight, who's a product designer, and Andrew Pelling, who's a scientist in the University of Ottawa, is called Ouroboros Steak, which comes with a website that shows you how to grow your own cells with your own blood, your own serum, so that you don't necessarily need to use any FBS or any other media. So what does it mean? Let me show you a couple of pictures. You can take your own cells from your own body. You can seed them onto mycelium scaffolds, and then you can feed them in a period of 3-4 months so that they can turn into these little blobs of meat. You can see on number 5, so that you can kill your own cells, decide when to terminate them because they're alive while you're growing them, and decide what to do with them in terms of eating them in different formats or sharing them with your friends and community. So it is a DIY way of culturing meat from yourself using your own very body. There's lots of complicated parts of it, obviously, because this looks like how you grow them after 3 months. There's lots of complicated issues with it, obviously, because people think that it's cannibalism. There's a lot of controversy around, like, what does it mean to eat yourself? The project that when we did it, it was a commission for an exhibition in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Then it moved to a number of prominent venues, to Minneapolis, Museum of Art, Volker Art Center, sorry, not Minneapolis, Volker Art Center, and then it moved to Design Museum London. It was nominated for a design award. You know, it lived its course as a speculative critical design piece that a lot of designers, you know, learned about, but it never captured public attention until, this is the exhibition, until Fox News picked it up because it was written, there was an article written about this in a public design outlet. It became a huge controversy, and about 60, 70 different news outlets in the world immediately started writing about it. They called it cannibalism. We rejected it's not actually cannibalism because you're not eating somebody else's meat. All of a sudden, this one little project, which is a very expensive and a very complicated project from a research perspective, started to become a caricature of an entire field, a discussion on an entire field. People pro-science were against more religious or right-wing people. They accused us for, you know, being unresponsible to human race. How can we feed ourselves? Instead, animals are created for humans. We should be consuming humans. All kinds of controversy. New York Times wrote about it. Not wrote about the project itself, but the kind of controversy that the project sparked. We received really I would say death threats, but death threats can, you know, signify all kinds of things in your head. We received a lot of hate messages and a lot of, you know, very angry tweets and mails from people because they really get very upset with the fact that some people can actually propose a substitution of the whole meat industry by just saying that what happens if you sacrifice a little bit from yourself, a little bit of cells that you can grow on the side, you know, not without even killing yourself. And instead of killing an animal, just sacrifice a little bit of yourself so that you can grow these meat blobs. Some people really got very, very offended. And that allowed us to really understand how humans are really so selfish in thinking about their relationship to the world. So I'm using very provocative language, I'm aware of that, but this is part of the work. This is the kind of risks that I would like to take as a designer, because this is not a fake project. This is all the cells are real. These are sourced from real humans, and I can tell you more if you ask in the Q&A session. What kind of things does it take for us to grow these kind of cells, and what kind of consensual relationship that you need to have with people who donate those cells? When you use your own cells, that's great, but if you use somebody else's cells, what does it mean in terms of ethics and responsibility? But let me end with a couple of, let me end with what I'm doing now so that you can see the connection of how I transition from the very speculative part of things to the real impact that you can make with others. Remember, I started when I talked about accountability and responsibility, I raised the question of our responsibility to tackle the big issues, big causes. And quickly you learn that regardless of how good you are or how creative you are, how imaginative you are, you cannot do these things on your own. You have to part with people. So you have to make partnerships with people. You have to build alliances. You have to sometimes work under situations where you're not the boss, you're not the team leader. You are going to be somebody who is going to take orders from other people. So what I'm doing now, I'm working with a company called Ecovative Design. It's a very important company in the history of biological design, because in the past 15 years, they learned, they investigated, they experimented how to make sustainable materials, packaging materials, building materials, and leather products using mycelium, the roots of mushrooms that are living under the soil. We grow them in a particular way and turn them into all kinds of products, from lampshades to leather products to packaging. So this is a commercially successful business. It's not a small startup. There's 80 people. There's millions of dollars of investment in there. It's a very successful company. So I joined them. I am working with them to be able to really help with their research process so that I can bring some technical know-how into their mushroom cultivation business so that we can make products like this. So remember when I was showing you the cellular agriculture world where you're trying to make animal products, you don't have to use any animal cells. You don't have to use pig cells to be able to even make bacon. We have a commercial product now that is commercialized under the brand My Bacon from Atlas, the spin-off company from here. We are growing sheets of mycelium, which you can see here from this big blob. We can grow them and turn them into products like this so that they become meat alternatives, meat substitutes. And these are not like burgers where there are little shredded pieces of meat. These are really whole cut, very delicious, very good looking bacon that is asking you to think about your animal product consumption when there's an alternative, when there's a substitute. So this slide is important for me because it captures my desire for bringing something into masses, from my CDs into things. I didn't design this product. I joined this company because after seeing this product, because I really believe that making something accessible to people is very, very important. And sometimes you are not the person who really is behind the thing, but you need to join the people who really are experts in doing this. So that now this is, I'm an educator, I'm an artist, I'm a designer, and I'm also part of Ecovative to be able to really push this product, push this kind of imagination to the next level. So here's a little summary slide of what I have talked to you about myself, like how I started with questions, how I really think about impact, scalability, accountability, how I try to grow new fields when I don't find the fields fitting for myself, whether it's biology, whether it's computation, whether it's electronics, and how I needed to build my own companies, my own startups, and commercialize some tools to make it available to broader audiences, whether it's big companies like Puma or independent designers working their fashion studios in Brooklyn. I really care about the bigger issues that we need to deal with. And I think that's a very important part of our responsibility to not only challenge our own imagination of what can we do with our lives, but also try to make some good impact into the world with our own abilities to shape the work and also the people around us. So I'll stop here and I'll thank you for listening to me for this brief conversation. And hopefully I can answer a couple of your questions. And if the time doesn't permit, here's my contact information. You can always reach out to me and engage in a dialogue. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Orkan. Thank you so much for this very inspiring talk, very interesting and very disruptive as well. And I guess that we can feel a bit uncomfortable, but that's basically the purpose of this kind of week. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I know that you don't have so much time this afternoon. Maybe one or two questions, if you don't mind. That's fine with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Because you talk a lot about responsibility, about ethics as well. And to what extent actually do you think that it's more ethics that cultivate blood human cell instead of cow, for instance?
Yeah, that's an answer that deserves an entire 45-minute presentation. But I would say, I wrote about this and I can point you to the readings if the students are interested in reading more about it. My key point is about consent. So when you are taking the lives of another animal without their permission, there's a big consensual problem. Of course, you can tell me like, Orkan, when you eat cauliflowers or plants, what is the consent there? You know, like consent is a bigger issue that I think we should ethically and philosophically discuss. But when I take my own cells to grow myself, it's not that different from growing my hair or growing my fingernails. My body already grows these cells. But when you extract them from another animal without necessarily their consent, sometimes you'll kill these animals, sometimes these cells are taken out. And even for scientific purposes, you know, there's really not enough evidence that sometimes, you know, there's an ethical measure of obtaining those cells, because we see things that are non-human as secondary citizens of this world. And this is also a very problematic thing. I know there's a lot of work that goes into the ethics of being human in this world, but for me, the most consensual way of working with food or growing your own food is with your own cells. And I'm not pitching this as a solution that is going to feed 7 billion people. Don't get me wrong. The project is not about giving you an alternative or put a Band-Aid fix into the problem, but it's rather showing this work just to expose the lack of transparency in the cellular agriculture world, because there's a lot of people who are investing money and investing a lot of hopes into cellular agriculture, but we need to fix this FPS problem. And until we fix the serum problem that is coming from the cows, we need to look at what does it mean to really put ourselves onto the pedestal and actually sacrifice a little bit from this.
Yeah, and interesting. So it means that it's also in a certain way a political action, or it's a political message behind that. There is a question that someone finds the cell that can show actually the CO2 emissions that you can on the closes and so on to detect actually the CO2, and it's very useful actually, because thanks to that you can see concretely the CO2. To what extent is it possible to have a very big one to show actually, to visualize the CO2 to everyone? Could you
mean the little sensor?
Yes, the sensor that you use on the Puma, the Puma that you can use on the T-shirt, and it's very useful actually, because CO2 sometimes, it's something that invisible. So does it exist really, and to what extent we can visualize CO2, and to what extent we can have it bigger in order to visualize it? Yeah.
So actually, it's a really good question, because the science behind it is not very complicated, and it's a very scalable project, because algae, we have algae blooms in the world, right? Algae is part of the climate crisis, because there's now more global warming. There's a lot more algae in the world. But what does it mean to tune to the algae biomass and really try to understand how much carbon dioxide is in the air? So in my design, I wouldn't really make a bigger blob or bigger architecture to make these things more visible, because the space that we create for them needs to be in a particular ratio for the liquid that is around them, and almost how much nutrients they need to be able to survive. But you can make many of them. You can make hundreds of them. You can make thousands of them. There's no everything is biodegradable and biocompostable, and the pouches that we built are reusable. So if you produce a lot of them, I think that's a better thing than just building a giant public display. But I also think that, I didn't mention this, the project is called Carbon Eaters, because the algae also consumes the carbon dioxide in the environment. So because this is a specific type of algae that really, and also most algae does this, they take in the carbon dioxide from the environment, and with sunlight, they transform things. If you make a little bit of that visible to people, we can also say that, okay, you not only visualize the carbon dioxide in the environment, but also you can transform the environment almost like a little forest. You can have tiny little micro forests that you can wear on your body that can clean the air as well. So the short answer is that now I wouldn't make it big, but I would look at how people can do this thing at home so that everyone can produce one by themselves.
Thank you. There is a question about, which is very interesting for us, because when we do a week like Imagination Week, we are looking for a visionary spirit, disruptive ideas, and so on and so forth. And you did it. You had lots of disruptive ideas. But in the meantime, as you know, that when you have disruptive idea, at the same time you have some people against your ideas, some oppositions, or you are a weird guy, or this idea is totally wrong, or it's not ethics, and so on. How do you deal with the people that's against disruptive ideas? How could you feel yourself when you had this kind of opposition?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because that happened quite a bit when we had the Fox News article that wrote about the thing, and then I really got bothered with a lot of people, a lot of messages that was coming to us, and at some certain times they were really very pessimistic, because they were really, people were saying that I'd rather feed you to my dog as opposed to thinking about your embracing your idea. So pretty offensive, right? But that makes us realize that the work itself is not created for a museum. The work itself is not created for an artwork for a presentation. The work itself exists in the public discourse. I welcome everyone's opinion about this work. the work that Ouroboros stake, that cannibalistic project, is actually become very much more powerful when it became so disturbing to other people. That's where I realized that through the discourse, through the conversation, the project gained a completely different meaning. It became beyond ourselves, because when we imagined the project, we were really not thinking about all the different consequences. Now, whether it's disrupting things for good or whether it's disrupting things in an unproductive way, but people start asking themselves this question: what if this person is right? What if this technology is eventually going to be very useful for this world? Because there's nothing wrong with cellular agriculture. I truly believe in the field of cellular agriculture. And I think it's going to be very important to take certain decisions if you want to feed 7 billion people on this planet. It's an important thing about our future of the human diet. But the question is, how do you engage with this audience? So sometimes I engage with email, Twitter, Instagram. Sometimes I engage with them in these kind of presentations, sometimes in an exhibition setting. But I think for me, the most important message to give is that I am also now working with a company to commercialize these products, not as disruptive innovations that will pluck their feathers and make them agitated. This is a product that you can buy. Maybe you're not going to grow your human cells to eat yourself, but here's an alternative. Here's a bacon substitution that is done properly, with ethical reason, with ethics and responsibility in place, which is commercially available. So that's my answer to how I deal with my own ideas. Sometimes I provoke, but sometimes I also calm down and work with the people who can actually commercialize these ideas for bigger scale. And then it's not about me. I will not be the narcissistic, egoistic designer. It's also like staying in the back seat and try to build these things to make them accessible.
Thank you. To conclude our talk today, what is the next step for you? Because actually, when you look at what you've done the last decades, actually you have a project and then you go a bit further and then further, and then it looked like you have no limits into your imaginations. Maybe you have a magical recipe you want to share with us. How is it possible to get this kind of unlimited imagination? And the second thing is about what is your next project, just to conclude.
That's a tough one because it is, it's really never obvious what kind of things I will do. But but I am also realizing that now, after doing lots of different projects, what I really enjoy most is sometimes being in the backseat and really try to really work with the people, support the people who are actually going to be in the front line. So I'm becoming a little bit more on the educator side or the manager side of things and not being the drivers of innovation. But I will give you a secret, because you asked me like, why is it really so important? How can you really be imaginative? And I will tell you one thing. I was not like this. I always worried what I didn't really know when I was entering into a space. I was working with computers, but I was worried about what kind of things that I really don't know to work with computers. When I went into the biology, I was freaking out. I don't have a PhD in biology. I'm an outsider. I don't know the language. It was really very limiting to me. And at some point, I really learned how to be fearless about this. And I'm not going to say this is an easy thing, but now I can very confidently tell you that I can design anything. I can design anything in any scale. I can design buildings. I can design cars. I can design microorganisms. I can design, what's the most crazy thing that I'm working on now? I'm working on immortalized cell lines. How can you make cancerous cells that can continue to build themselves endlessly? Because cancer is what we are freaking out right now. But what happens if you put cancer in use and really design with it? So that's my next project that I'm working on behind the scenes. But this is coming from a little bit of this very naive fearlessness. And I also say this because I'm a naive person. Designers are usually very naive. They're very over-optimistic about their capabilities, but I'm going to push for it. Whether it is going to be successful or not, in the next presentation, you may see the outcomes of this work. But it is important for me to communicate that you never know enough. You never are expert enough in a field. If you talk to Nobel laureates, they will tell you how little they know about their fields. But they are very powerful when they acknowledge their limits, and how they deal with the limits is the most important part.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Orkan, for this conference this afternoon, this morning. For you, thank you so much. That was very inspiring. It's a great approach of imaginations, and for our students, it's so useful. Thank you so much. I wish you the best, and I would like to thank you personally. Thank you again for making it possible to do it. Thank you so much. Take care of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate everything, and I will look forward to working with you later in the future. Thank you. And good luck with everything. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Orkan. Thank you. So on our side, for this afternoon, you will get a break, a very short one, in order to join your tutors just right after. The Imagineers for the workshop 5, and the workshop 5, it's with your tutor. I'm always a bit worried and sad when I look at these kind of pictures with all of you, and I really hope that quite soon we can be together as well. So workshop 5 right now with your Imagineers, it is an important part because tomorrow will be the last day to prepare your project. Friday will be to share your project. Tomorrow will be to finalize your project. So this workshop is very, very important. So I hope that you're going to be very motivated and involved in your project, because we can't wait to see your project. So please have a break, breathe, have a cup of whatever you want, tea, coffee, or hit about your own flesh, about yourself a bit if you want to get some energy. Take care. On our side, we're going to be together tomorrow at 9. We're going to have a conference with Hajar Moussanif tomorrow morning about artificial intelligence, a lady from Morocco. So it will be tomorrow at 9 precisely. Enjoy your afternoon, work hard, play hard as well, and see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.